Evan Rourke spent years hiding his family's dark legacy, until Marla Henson threatened to expose the truth buried inside the old mill. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Ridgewood Springs had always been the kind of place people described as peaceful, almost frozen in time. Nestled between thick forests and wide, empty highways, it offered the comfort of familiarity to everyone who lived there. Most families had stayed for generations, passing down old houses, old stories and old habits. Outsiders rarely moved in, and locals rarely moved out. That quiet routine made the town feel safe, predictable, and untouched by the chaos of bigger cities. But beneath the surface, Ridgewood Springs carried a weight that most people sensed but never discussed. Streets that looked warm and welcoming during the day felt strangely heavy at night, as if the air thickened with secrets that didn't want to be disturbed. People loved to say nothing bad ever happened there, but they also avoided eye contact when saying it, as if afraid the town might hear and correct them. Rumors drifted quietly through the community, passed around in hushed tones and nervous glances. Some residents believed the land itself remembered old mistakes. Others said certain families held more power than they should. Still, life went on the same way it always had. Simple routines, familiar faces, and a silence that pretended to be peaceful but was actually something far more complicated. Into this environment lived 34-year-old Marla Henson, a photographer who paid attention to details most people ignored. Marla had grown up in Ridgewood Springs, but left for several years before returning to care for her aging father. Her time away had changed her. She no longer looked at the town with the easy acceptance of someone who believed everything was fine. Instead, she observed it with curiosity and quiet suspicion. She noticed the way people paused when passing certain buildings. She noticed how conversations shifted when the old lumber mill was mentioned. Most of all, she noticed how the town looked beautiful on the surface, but felt unsettled underneath. Marla spent her days capturing small pieces of Ridgewood Springs through her camera, peeling paint on abandoned barns, strange carvings on tree trunks, forgotten corners of empty roads. Her photos revealed the town's history in a way words never could. Locals often wondered why she focused on the places they preferred to ignore. But Marla had a habit of digging into things that didn't make sense. She believed that every quiet place had a story, and she had no problem being the one to uncover it. Her curiosity made some people uneasy, though they hid it behind polite smiles. They claimed she was just eccentric, a harmless artist who spent too much time alone. But a few residents knew she was looking in places they hoped would stay buried, and for the first time in many years the careful balance of Ridgewood Springs began to shift, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. When Marla disappeared, it wasn't just her absence that disturbed the town. It was the sense that she had discovered something she was never meant to find. Ridgewood Springs had always tried to protect its image, but now the truth hovered just outside reach, threatening to break the silence the town had guarded for decades. And deep down, many residents feared that the peace they bragged about had always been a lie, one held together by secrets, pressure, and the hope that no one would dare to look too closely. Marla Henson's disappearance began as a simple concern, the kind of worry residents brushed aside with comforting explanations. Maybe she had driven out of town for a photo shoot. Maybe she had gone hiking and lost track of time. Maybe she just needed a break. In Ridgewood Springs, people preferred harmless answers over disturbing possibilities. But as hours turned into a full day, and then another, it became clear that something was very wrong. Marla was responsible, organized, and deeply attached to her daily routine. She never left without telling someone. Her father waited for her to return, staring at the door long after the sun had set, convinced that at any moment she would walk in and explain everything. She never did. Her car was found first, abandoned near the old lumber mill, a place most people avoided without fully understanding why. The mill had been closed for decades, left to rot at the edge of town, its wooden beams sagging and its windows shattered long ago. Over the years, a few curious teenagers ventured inside, only to return with stories they refused to repeat. Adults called the building unsafe, but their warnings held an odd, fearful tone. The discovery of Marla's car there immediately raised suspicion. The driver's door was unlocked. The keys rested on the passenger seat, and the interior was spotless, as if she had stepped out casually. But anyone who knew Marla also knew she would never leave her keys unattended in a place like that. Police arrived quickly, eager to label the scene as a simple missing person case. They searched the area around the mill and found no signs of struggle, no tracks, no items dropped in panic. The only thing out of place was the absence of Marla's camera. She never went anywhere without it, and its disappearance suggested she had taken it with her, either willingly or because someone had made her. Investigators questioned why she had been at the mill in the first place, but people close to her were not surprised. Marla had been exploring abandoned sites for weeks. Her recent project focused on forgotten locations, and she had mentioned wanting to photograph the mill's upper floors. Most assumed she went there to work, unaware that her interest in the building had taken a more serious turn. As the police expanded their search, residents quietly whispered theories to one another. Some believed she had discovered something hidden inside the mill. Others thought she had accidentally fallen into one of the unsafe areas. A few insisted the land was cursed and that Marla had disturbed something that should have remained untouched. But the most unsettling theory came from those who remembered old stories about the mill, stories involving missing workers, strange night activity, and a family who once controlled the property with an iron grip. By the end of the week, it became impossible to deny that Marla's disappearance was connected to something deeper. Her last known location, the missing camera, and the unnatural silence surrounding the investigation hinted at a truth Ridgewood Springs had tried to bury. The mill was more than an abandoned structure. It was a place tied to the town's darkest memories, and now it seemed those memories had resurfaced, starting with the disappearance of the one person curious enough to uncover them. The search of Marla Henson's home was supposed to be routine, a simple check for clues about where she might have gone or whom she might have planned to meet. Investigators expected to find unfinished work, maybe travel notes, or signs she planned to leave town for a while. Instead, the discovery inside her small, neatly organized bedroom changed the direction of the entire investigation. Hidden beneath her bed, pushed far back against the wall, was a metal box secured with an old-fashioned padlock. The box looked worn, as if it had been handled many times, but the dust on top suggested she hadn't opened it recently. When investigators unlocked it, they found a collection of items that made it clear Marla had been digging into something much larger than anyone knew. Inside were printed photographs of the old mill taken weeks before she disappeared. These were not artistic shots or part of any known project. The photos were focused on specific details: the layout of the building, unusual markings on the floor, a locked underground door, and what appeared to be old filing cabinets pushed into a corner. Alongside the photographs was a handwritten list containing names no one recognized. The list included dates and small notes, some crossed out, others marked with symbols. None of the names belonged to local residents, but they seemed connected, as if they were part of a pattern Marla had been trying to piece together. Investigators quickly realized that Marla had not been simply photographing abandoned buildings. She had been tracking something that pointed back to the mill. Questions rose about how she found these names, what they meant, and why she kept them hidden. Even more unsettling was the fact that she had told no friends or family about this research. Marla was usually open about her projects, often sharing her ideas before they were complete. Her secrecy now suggested that she knew she was dealing with information too dangerous to discuss freely. When details of the box leaked through the investigating team, the town council stepped forward unexpectedly, urging the police to treat the mill as sensitive historical property. They insisted that further investigation of the building could cause legal issues, environmental concerns, and unnecessary town-wide panic. Their sudden involvement confused the investigators, who couldn't understand why an abandoned structure mattered so much to a group that rarely participated in law enforcement matters. It became clear the council wanted to slow down the process, something that raised more questions than answers. The more the investigators reviewed the photos and notes, the clearer it became that Marla's disappearance was tied to whatever she had uncovered. Her notes showed she had returned to the mill multiple times, each visit focusing on a different area. The fact that she had documented the place so thoroughly meant she had sensed something was hidden there. Something worth the risk. The list of names, combined with the meticulous way she had studied the building, hinted at a buried history the town had quietly ignored for decades. Marla had been close to finding something important, maybe even dangerous, and now, the locked box served as proof that her disappearance was not random. It was connected to a secret that someone in Ridgewood Springs desperately wanted to protect, a truth carefully buried beneath years of silence and fear. 3 weeks after Marla's disappearance, Ridgewood Springs woke to a discovery that silenced the town in a way no rumor or theory ever had. Workers handling routine maintenance near the old lumber mill noticed a foul smell coming from a large rusted water tank behind the property. The tank had been inactive for decades, surrounded by weeds and forgotten by most. At first, they assumed the smell came from a dead animal. But when they opened the access panel, that they found inside brought the entire investigation to a horrifying halt. Floating in the dark, stagnant water was a decomposed body. Authorities were called immediately, and soon the area was sealed off with bright tape that fluttered in the wind like a warning sign no one wanted to acknowledge. The body was badly deteriorated, but DNA testing confirmed what many feared. It was Marla Henson. Her disappearance was no longer a mystery to be solved slowly. It was now a murder that demanded answers. The discovery shifted control of the case from local police to state investigators, who moved quickly and methodically. The autopsy revealed injuries that made it unmistakably clear she had not fallen or wandered into danger by accident. She had been pushed from a significant height inside the mill, hitting beams and debris on the way down. The bruising indicated a struggle, showing she had fought back moments before her death. The placement of her body in the water tank suggested careful, deliberate disposal meant to hide her for as long as possible. The news spread rapidly through the town. Fear settled everywhere. Inside grocery aisles, at school pickup lines, in quiet conversations between neighbors, people who once claimed Ridgewood Springs was the safest place on earth now locked their doors long before evening. Parents warned their children not to walk alone. Strangers eyed each other with suspicion. It wasn't just the violence of the crime that scared residents, it was the realization that someone capable of such an act lived among them. Investigators turned their attention back to the mill, treating it as the primary crime scene. They searched the building thoroughly, uncovering broken boards, disturbed dust patterns, and signs someone had moved through the structure recently. It became clear that Marla had been inside the building the night she died. Her camera still hadn't been found, intensifying the belief that it held evidence the killer wanted to erase. The state team documented claw marks on a wooden beam near an open drop shaft that matched the defensive injuries Marla sustained, leaving no doubt she had tried to save herself. The local police force, already struggling under the weight of public anger, faced additional scrutiny when it became known they had dismissed early concerns about the mill. Residents criticized officers for assuming Marla had simply gone off on her own, ignoring the uneasy feeling many people had expressed. Now, the truth was undeniable. The abandoned mill was tied to something dark, and Marla had uncovered a part of it before someone silenced her. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the lack of clear suspects. Marla was well-liked, polite, and rarely involved in conflict. Her only unusual behavior had been her recent fascination with the mill, a curiosity that now seemed like the key to everything. The gruesome truth inside the water tank forced the people of Ridgewood Springs to face a reality they had avoided for years. Someone had killed Marla to protect a secret buried within the town's history, and that killer had been confident they could hide the truth forever. But with her body now found, the silence that once protected the town's darkest corners began to crack, and long-hidden truths were finally starting to surface. Attention quickly shifted to Evan Rourke, not because investigators already had proof, but because his name surfaced again and again in the background of every clue connected to the mill. Evan was the current owner of the abandoned property, a man whose family had been rooted in Ridgewood Springs for generations. The Rourke name carried influence, social, financial, and political. Many local businesses depended on Evan's investments, and members of his family held seats on the town council. People trusted him, or at least pretended to, because challenging a Rourke rarely ended well for anyone. But as the investigation deepened, it became impossible to ignore the long shadow his family cast across the town's history. State investigators learned that Evan had inherited the mill from his grandfather, who had once operated it during a period many residents preferred not to mention. According to informal accounts, workers had disappeared under suspicious circumstances decades earlier, particularly temporary laborers passing through the region. Local authorities at the time had written the cases off as men who had moved on, but the timing and frequency suggested something more sinister. Old records revealed missing payroll sheets, unregistered employees, and unexplained fires that destroyed company documents. These details aligned disturbingly well with the notes found in Marla's locked box. The names she had collected, once anonymized by time, seemed to belong to individuals who were never officially reported missing. The connection between those names and the mill drew investigators back to Evan. When questioned, Evan maintained a calm exterior, insisting he barely visited the property and had no knowledge of any criminal activity tied to his family. He claimed the mill had simply been a burden he kept out of obligation, not interest, but there were cracks in his story. Records revealed he had recently paid for security upgrades around the property, despite saying he never went there. A neighbor claimed to have seen him driving near the mill late at night on several occasions, and an old document uncovered in the county archives showed Evan had applied for a renovation permit the year before, something he denied during questioning. The inconsistencies made him appear nervous, even if he tried to hide it. His reactions grew sharper each time investigators mentioned Marla's photographs. The missing camera also raised suspicion toward him, as he had both the access and motive to make sure any evidence found on it never resurfaced. The more investigators dug, the clearer it became that Evan was hiding something. Whether it was guilt, fear, or simply the weight of his family's buried past, no one could say yet, but his behavior shifted as the investigation pressed deeper. He became defensive, evasive, and almost desperate to steer attention away from the mill. Meanwhile, townspeople began whispering about Evan in ways they never had before. Some claimed his family had always been too powerful. Others said the Rourkes had kept Ridgewood Springs under tight control for generations, using their reputation to silence rumors. For years these whispers carried no consequence. But now, with Marla's murder placing the spotlight directly on the mill, the power that once protected Evan seemed to be crumbling. The pressure intensified when investigators uncovered that Marla had reached out to someone shortly before she disappeared, someone with information about the Rourke family's activities decades ago. That contact had not yet been identified, but the timing suggested Marla had been close to uncovering a truth the Rourkes desperately wanted hidden. Whether Evan was directly involved in her death or simply part of the larger secret remained unknown. But one thing grew increasingly clear. Marla had not been the only person afraid of what she had found. Someone else felt threatened, too threatened enough to kill. The investigation took a dramatic turn when a retired security guard named Harlan Beach unexpectedly stepped forward. Harlan had lived quietly on the outskirts of Ridgewood Springs for years, spending most of his time alone in a small trailer near the woods. He was known for being withdrawn, a man who preferred fishing at the river to social gatherings. Most people barely remembered he had once worked security at the mill decades earlier. But when he learned about Marla's death, something in him shifted. Whether it was guilt, fear, or the weight of old memories, he finally broke the silence he had carried for too long. Harlan contacted investigators and revealed information they hadn't expected. He admitted that on the night Marla disappeared, he had seen her entering the mill. He had been driving past the area and noticed her car parked outside. Her presence shocked him, because he believed no one in their right mind would go near that building after dark unless they had a specific purpose. He didn't stop or approach her, but he never forgot the image of her walking through the broken doorway with her camera bag over her shoulder. What unsettled him even more was who he saw shortly afterward. Harlan claimed that Evan Rourke's truck appeared near the mill less than an hour later, its headlights briefly flashing across the road before turning toward the property. But that wasn't the only thing Harlan confessed. He also revealed that years earlier, he had been asked by members of the Rourke family, specifically Evan, to destroy old records stored inside the mill. These records included employment documents, warehouse logs, and handwritten ledgers. According to Harlan, Evan insisted the papers were outdated and unnecessary. But the way he had phrased the request made it clear that the records were not meant to be seen by anyone. Harlan had burned most of the documents in a fire pit behind the building, but some remained locked in a room he had been instructed never to open. His testimony confirmed that the mill held secrets far darker than rumors suggested. The moment investigators attempted to interview Harlan again for more details, everything took a chilling turn. He was found dead inside his trailer early the next morning. The scene was staged to look like a suicide, but investigators quickly recognized inconsistencies. The angle of the weapon, the position of his body, and the forced entry marks on the back door told a different story. Someone had silenced him before he could say more. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Harlan had come forward after years of keeping quiet, and within hours of sharing his knowledge, he was gone. News of Harlan's death sent shockwaves through Ridgewood Springs. Residents who had already been frightened by Marla's murder now felt the terror of realizing that anyone who knew too much was in danger. Harlan's final confession confirmed that Marla had not stumbled blindly into danger. She had been following a trail of secrets connected to the Rourke family and the mill's hidden history. It also proved that someone closely involved in that history was still watching, still protecting themselves, and still willing to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose the truth. With Harlan gone, investigators were left with more questions than answers. But his testimony lit a clear path. Marla had discovered something inside the mill that terrified someone accustomed to having power. Harlan's death was meant to stop the investigation, but instead it intensified it. The state team now understood they were dealing with a killer who was desperate, calculating, and far more dangerous than anyone in Ridgewood Springs had imagined. Investigators returned to the old lumber mill with renewed urgency after Harlan Beach's death. His final confession acted like a map, pointing them toward areas of the building they had previously overlooked. With new search warrants and a team prepared for anything, they approached the decaying structure with caution. The mill, once a place of noise and industry, now felt like a hollow shell holding memories that resisted being uncovered. Every step echoed against rusted metal and splintered wood, creating an eerie sense that the building itself was watching. Attention centered on a section of the mill that had been boarded up decades earlier, a place Marla had photographed repeatedly in the images found in her metal box. The basement entrance, sealed under thick planks, was pried open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. A stale, damp smell rose from below, mixed with something older and harder to identify. The stairs creaked under the investigators' weight, as if protesting their intrusion. At the bottom, they found a narrow hallway lined with dust-covered pipes and scattered debris. A single steel door sat at the end of the corridor, rusted shut, but with its hinges weakened enough to be forced open. Inside the room was evidence that instantly shifted the entire investigation. The space did not match the rest of the mill's emptiness. It looked as though someone had once used it as a private storage area. Against the wall stood metal cabinets, many locked, some hanging open. Inside were items that should have been destroyed long ago, employment ledgers, listing names that matched those in Marla's notes, payroll sheets, documenting workers who were never factually recorded, and reports of injuries and accidents that had been covered up. These documents painted a picture of the mill as more than just a workplace. It was a hidden site where crimes were committed in the shadows of industry. Even more disturbing were the tape recordings found in a dusty cardboard box. Old cassette labels bore dates and initials that matched the Rourke family's timeline of ownership. When investigators played the tapes, they heard muffled conversations discussing payments, threats, and plans to remove workers who asked too many questions. The voices were distorted, but the implications were unmistakable. This room was the mill's buried heart, the place where decades of illegal operations had been planned, concealed, and protected. The final discovery in the hidden room changed everything. In a drawer, investigators found copies of documents that had clearly been made recently. Only one person could have created those copies: Marla. She had found this room before her death, photographed it, and analyzed every detail. Her notes suggested she had taken digital scans of select documents and sent them to an unknown recipient. This revelation meant she had not been working alone during the final stages of her investigation. Someone else knew everything Marla discovered, and that person was still out there. The copies also explained the missing camera. Whoever killed Marla must have believed all evidence was stored inside it. Nowhere she had already sent files to someone she trusted. The killer's attempt to erase her work had failed. Her efforts, careful and thorough, continued to expose the truth even after her death. The state team emerged from the mill with evidence strong enough to reopen decades of forgotten cases. Residents learned that the mill, once a symbol of Ridgewood Springs' pride, had operated with a darker purpose hidden behind its walls. The truth confirmed every rumor that had trickled through town over the years. What no one yet understood was who had inherited the responsibility of protecting these secrets, and who remained desperate enough to kill for them. The discovery under the mill did more than expose the past. It provided a new path leading directly to the small sickle of people still connected to the Rourke legacy. And investigators now realized that the killer wasn't reacting out of panic but out of years of practiced control. Whoever orchestrated the cover-up had continued the work long after the mill shut down. Someone with authority, influence, and confidence had believed the truth would never surface. But now, thanks to Marla, the silence was cracking open, and the person behind it was finally within reach. Just when investigators believed they finally understood the pattern behind the mill's dark history, a new discovery rearranged everything. Evidence from the underground room pointed toward the Rourke family, but there were inconsistencies that didn't fit Evan Rourke's timeline or behavior. Although he acted suspiciously, investigators realized he lacked both the precision and the strategic thinking needed to orchestrate decades of cover-ups. The trail of documents, recordings, and hidden ledgers pointed to someone with a different kind of influence, someone who moved quietly, blended in easily, and had access to every decision made in Ridgewood Springs. The spotlight shifted toward Brooke Rourke, Evan's younger cousin, a woman known for her charity work, calm temperament, and polite leadership on the town council. Her reputation was a mask so perfectly crafted that no one had ever considered her capable of violence or manipulation. Investigators began piecing together Brooke's movements during the time of Marla's disappearance and found subtle but undeniable red. She had been near the mill several times in the months leading up to the murder, under the guise of surveying potential restoration projects. Publicly, she spoke about turning the mill into a historical preservation site, but her private logs showed irregular gaps and late-night entries. Financial records revealed she was funneling money through abandoned accounts linked to the old mill's operations, continuing activities that matched the illegal trades documented on the tapes. Brooke had inherited more than property from her family. She had inherited control. When investigators cross-checked Marla's copied files, they discovered that some of them contained Brooke's initials on orders written long after the mill had officially closed. Brooke had quietly revived the underground network, using the mill's forgotten reputation to hide her activity in plain sight. Marla had captured a clear image of Brooke in one of her missing camera files, an image investigators eventually recovered from the digital backup Marla had sent to a trusted source. The photo showed Brooke entering the mill late at night, a box in her hands matching one of the containers later found in the hidden room. It was the final piece needed to connect her directly to the ongoing illegal operation. The true twist came when investigators confronted Brooke. Instead of panicking, she remained eerily calm, answering questions with rehearsed confidence. But the moment they presented the photograph, her expression shifted, not with guilt, but with frustration, as though she had expected to erase every trace and was annoyed by this one oversight. Her composure cracked just enough for investigators to understand they were dealing with someone who had managed secrets her entire life. She had learned to manipulate, intimidate, and silence without ever appearing involved. As the investigation closed in, Brooke attempted to frame Evan, relying on his inconsistencies to paint him as the primary suspect. But her plan unraveled when phone records revealed she had contacted Harlan Beach the night before his death, contradicting her earlier claim that she barely knew him. Investigators realized she had eliminated him to prevent him from fully exposing her involvement. The staged suicide had been her attempt to control the narrative, just as she had controlled the town for years. Her arrest sent shock waves through Ridgewood Springs. Residents struggled to understand how someone they trusted so deeply had orchestrated such darkness behind a polished public image. The quiet, helpful council member they admired had been the person continuing the mill's criminal operations long after the rest of the Rourke family abandoned them. Evan had been covering for her out of fear, not loyalty, because Brooke held leverage over him with threats tied to their family's past. The truth rippled through the town, forcing everyone to question the peace they believed in. Marla's photographs, notes, and courage had finally exposed what Ridgewood Springs tried to hide for decades. Though her life was taken, her determination ensured the truth could not be buried again. The mill was sealed permanently, the council was restructured, and the long-ignored shadows over the town finally began to fade. But even as Ridgewood Springs attempted to heal, people still spoke quietly about the secrets that might remain hidden. Marla had uncovered only part of the truth, and her investigation hinted at deeper layers waiting to be found. Yet one thing was certain. The biggest secret had finally been confronted, and the person who tried hardest to hide it was now behind bars. The small town had carried a big secret, but in the end, it was Marla's persistence that brought the darkness into the light.